Take this discussion forward is Vaidyanathan Iyer, National Affairs Editor at the Indian Express. He joins us from Boston. He has, of course, been tracking this story for the last 10 months. Also with us, R. Prasad, former chairman of the Central Board for Direct Taxes, the CBDT, joins us. With us in the studio, Dinesh Kanabar, tax expert and CEO of Dhruva Advisors, and Iman Alves of CNBC, also with us. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. Vaidi, if I could come to you first. It's been a 10-month-long investigation. You worked on the Panama Papers as well. Give me a sense of how different this particular experience was. And, what did it take for you to be able to elicit responses, clarifications, when you reached out to the people that have been mentioned when it comes to the 714 of the India list?
Yeah. So basically, if you look at the Paradise Papers, more than the dissimilarities or how different the Paradise Papers is, I think there are a lot of similarities with, Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, because essentially they talk about the huge database leak which has happened from one of the giant incorporators. So in this case, it is Bermuda-based Appleby and the Asia Cities Trust, as you mentioned. Of course, our process was quite elaborate because we, for the first 7-8 months, we were just looking at all the data trove and figuring out the Indian names in that, because there were 13.4 million documents, and this was much larger in terms of just the size or in terms of number of documents. So it was a tough one just to figure out the Indian aspect of it, and then each Indian company or each Indian connection led to several thousand documents. So that itself was a challenge. But post that, we found out we actually spread out to our local bureaus across the country, and we did physical verification of addresses. We gave adequate notices to all the people on whom we were writing reports based on these documents, and we gave them enough time to respond. So many of them responded, some of them chose not to respond. So we're still waiting for some of them. So that has been a kind of very foolproof exercise that we have gone through over the last 10 months.
Okay, Vaidi, I'll just come back to you, but let me go across to Iman. Iman, what is the reaction in the U.S.? Wilbur Ross on CNBC denying the allegations that have been made by the Paradise Papers, but any other reactions coming in from the corporations that have been mentioned or any of the other individuals that have been mentioned?
Yeah, we've seen an enormous reaction here in Washington, D.C., and that's because there are so many prominent individuals and corporations named in this. And I think your report hit it exactly right. The big difference between the Panama Papers of about a year and a half ago and this leak today is the number of Americans and prominent corporations that are mentioned. We didn't see very many Americans at all in the Panama Papers. In this case, we're seeing some very big names indeed. Wilbur Ross, as you point out on CNBC from London this morning, denying that he did anything improper here, calling this a normal commercial relationship. Of course, we knew in the United States that Wilbur Ross was a fabulously wealthy individual. He had disclosed a number of his holdings and said which ones he was going to retain, and he was going to divest himself of quite a few of those holdings back when he took the job as Commerce Secretary here in Washington under Donald Trump. But this is a new allegation. Ross here defending himself, saying he didn't do anything wrong. But we're going to wait and see what the fallout is for all these other companies as well, because, of course, as you mentioned, Twitter, Facebook, Nike, Apple, and a number of others are all mentioned in these documents. So it's going to take some time to sort through all this and figure out what the ramifications are.
Very quickly, before I let you go, Iman, more trouble now for the Trump administration post this leak?
I think so. And one of the big questions that we're going to be asking here in Washington is who did this and why. We never really found out who was behind the Panama Papers leak last year. And in this case, similarly, the law firm at the center of it with an office in Bermuda called Appleby is saying that it was the victim of an illegal computer hack. Well, who conducted that hack and to what end is a real open question here. Appleby says there was an obvious political agenda to the theft of these documents from the law firm, but we'll wait and see if we can find out at all through forensic means or legal means who did this and what they were trying to accomplish when they did it. But obviously a big political story now here in Washington this week. The president is out of Washington. He is traveling in Asia this week, so that might minimize some of the response here simply because so many of the top people are traveling with the president as he does that multi-nation tour in Asia.
Iman, appreciate you joining us there from New York to give us a sense of how the Paradise Papers are shaking things up there. But Mr. Prasad, let me come to you, sir. You know, as we've just heard from Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, saying that, look, a lot of this was normal commercial relationship. But I would imagine that that is going to be the argument that we will hear from a lot of people. From the CBDT's point of view, and the CBDT has given us an update of where things stand on the investigations pertaining to the Panama Papers. What is it that you would like to see the CBDT do now, sir?
Actually, CBDT should fix a timeline by which they will be able to complete the investigation. Now, people are talking about Panama Papers. It has been more than a year, and no one knows what has happened. Today, CBDT has come out with something, some item which says some people have been prosecuted, some cases have been investigated. So there should be, I think, after a couple of months or 3 months, there should be a briefing what is happening. People are interested in knowing what is happening. As this case is concerned, there are 714 Indians in it. Now, all the Indians may not be resident in India. Many of them may be resident abroad. So they will not be covered under this. It's only case of tax evasion which comes under the purview of the CBDT. All the cases may not be of tax evasion. There may be some arrangement. Somebody wants to start a business in USA. USA is having a high tax. He opens a company in Bermuda. So actually, if you go after all of them, then you are in a way killing entrepreneurship also. So So
there has to be that line that you draw between. I get the point that you're making, but Dinesh Kanabar, let me come to you, sir. You know, as Iman was pointing out, this is a data hack, allegedly. This is leaked information that is now being accessed by people around the world. But outside of that, let's talk about the India example, for instance. We have strengthened our information sharing mechanism with a lot of countries, including with a country like Switzerland. So would you say that in the past year or 2 years since the Panama Papers leak, that at least when it comes to information sharing, we have made a forward movement?
Before I answer that question, Shirin, I would like to make two very quick, but what I think is very, very relevant points. You mentioned about the fact that there are issues of tax evasion. In the context of India, there is also a question as to whether there is a violation of exchange control regulations. So USA does not have exchange control regulations. It may be purely a tax issue. India, it could be a combined issue, number one.
Right.
Number two, Shirin, somewhere along the line, when people talk about some of this may be genuine, some of this may not be genuine, there is somewhere the very fact that a name of a person or an organization features in a newspaper report, there is an insinuation that there is something wrong. And that's something which I don't approve of. Because as we said earlier, we have situations where a person may have been a non-resident, resettled into India. A person actually is carrying on business activities and nothing wrong with what's happening. Whereas the sheer fact that this name is coming really paints a mud. Coming to your question on exchange of information, I think India has made a huge amount of progress. There is a protocol which has been signed with Switzerland, pursuant to which Switzerland has agreed to share certain information post 1st April 11. There are three really important issues which come out there. First is, would any country be willing to share information pursuant to a stolen data? Yes or no? And there's a huge amount of judicial precedents out there, and the view is yet to emerge from the Supreme Court of Switzerland as to whether Switzerland would share information if this data was stolen, number one. Number two is the relevance of the data, as to how relevant is the data to tax proceedings in India. And there is a huge amount of, as I said, litigation going on there, but India has made considerable progress there.
Okay, considerable progress. Vedi, respond to the point being made there by Dinesh Kanabar saying, look, I don't approve of putting out these names in public till you ascertain whether they're guilty or not. And, you know, you've promised to keep us engaged over the next 40 days. So what should we expect now, Vedi?
See, I think, you know, this is, you know, that just some time back, Anam said that, you know, this is a huge breach of privacy issue. I think you are shooting down the messenger. I think that is kind of a very, very obvious reaction, which everybody says to kind of protect the larger, you know, tax, or to my mind, it's a very work avoidance issue. You're not tackling the basic issue of tax avoidance and tax evasion, how they are closely linked. So corporates do employ multiple ways to kind of, you know, set up huge offshore, a network of huge offshore entities. They use these entities as, you know, as intermediaries between themselves and the holding companies. These offshore entities change ownership of shares and, you know, move millions of dollars from one jurisdiction to another. And all of it is undertaken by the management sitting back in India, which doesn't really has his hands on the pile. It takes all the decisions on behalf of the offshore entity. The offshore entity is set up with lots of proxy directors. So I think one thing which I would like to share is that, you know, of course, the Indian Express does amazing due diligence. They go knock it door to door, and of course, there is responsibility that, you know, we carry on our shoulders of giving every person named or every company being talked about an elaborate opportunity to say what they were doing about this transaction.
Okay, due diligence is being done. But Mr. Prasad, let me come back to you on the point that Vedi made that, you know, how do we sort of close the gap between tax avoidance and tax evasion? You were talking about time-bound investigation that the CBDT must do for the benefit of our viewers. In the case of the Panama Papers, which involved about 426 people, the CBDT says that out of the 147 actionable cases, investigations have led to the detection of undisclosed credits to the tune of just 792 crores so far. Searches conducted in 35 cases, surveys in 11 cases, and so on and so forth. But how do you close the gaps between tax avoidance and tax evasion, Mr. Prasad, in light of what we've seen happen with the Panama Papers and now the Paradise Papers?
See, in Panama Papers, mostly individuals were involved. In this Paradise Papers, mostly corporates are involved. That is one difference. So in the team which is constituted under the CBDT, I think corporate affairs and SEBI people should also be there, because suppose some corporate did not disclose the account, foreign account in its balance sheet, then it's cheating the shareholders. So it's a case for SEBI.
Sure.
So they should also be brought in.
Okay.
Now the distinction between tax avoidance and tax evasion now is very thin. Tax avoidance will be what is legally permitted under the Act.
Right.
Otherwise, what people are doing, they are stretching that legal permissibility to a large extent. So, so now with POEM and BPS, all this coming, the gap has narrowed. So there
has narrowed considerably. And that's the point that I wanted to make, Dinesh Kanabar, with BEPS, etc., coming into effect now. Has that gap closed considerably? And from a specific investigation perspective, this multi-agency probe that we've been talking about, what, to your mind, would you like to see from a probe perspective?
Shirin, I wish I could agree with you that this has anything to do creating a distinction between tax avoidance and evasion. And I'll be very specific in my certain scenarios to you so you can appreciate the point that I am making. When the Panama Papers leak happened, there were individuals, and I'm personally aware that many of those individuals actually had sent monies out of the country using the LRS route. Once they send the money out of the country through LRS, if they use a tax haven to put those monies into investment funds, whatever else. I don't think there is either an evasion or an avoidance at all. These are monies which have legitimately gone.
Okay.
Simply look at the situation here. We are looking at corporates. And let's say that an Indian corporate is permitted to make investments overseas legally up to 4 times its net worth. It sends the money out for legitimate business purposes, has certain surplus for a moment of time, and that surplus is invested in certain instruments using a tax haven account. How is it really either an evasion or an avoidance? There is nothing wrong with any of it. So the point that I'm trying to make is I am very, very sure that as we investigate these 714 accounts, there will be certain cases which are downright tax evasion, and not just tax, but foreign exchange evasion, and they need to be brought to book. The government has been consistently working and needs to be commended on that. However, to just insinuate that everybody who's named out there is somebody who's a defaulter, and that by implication, I don't think is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think the ICJ has made that disclaimer. They have made that disclaimer very clearly. Very final comment to you. What should we expect next?
Yeah, I think, the government will do what is required. I think part of the media's responsibility is just out it. The whole idea is to just put it out. And to the point which, Dinesh Kanabar makes time and again about, how this insinuates about thousands of people who are named and, who got nothing to do. I think at the end of the day, you owe it to the people of India. People who are paying taxes in the middle class, lower middle class at whatever 10%, 20%, 30% levels.
Yes.
Not having access to any kind of advice, any kind of consultancy, any kind of, expertise, which, this multitude of corporate tax lawyers who provide to large corporations to even legally avoid taxes. Shireen, for a minute, I'll assume that everybody legally avoids taxes, right? But don't we owe it to the people who are paying taxes genuinely that they know how taxes are avoided by people legally? These large corporates who have got an army of corporate lawyers to assist them to do this, I think we owe it to the people.
All right, we will leave it there, gentlemen. Appreciate you joining us here this evening. P. Vaidyanathan of the Indian Express, R. Prasad, former chief of the CBDT, and Dinesh Kanabar of Dhruva Advisors. Thanks very much for your time. I suspect we're going to be having much more of this conversation.